Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of African News Review, your news program where we look at Africa's depiction in the Western media and give it context and also help demystify certain myths. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, beginning with the lady, Sister Fubara Eneli Esquire. She's the host of Rethinking Freedom, co-host Women in Resistance, and also Grill and Books. And welcome, sister. The gentleman, journalist, broadcaster, publisher, Black Star News on WBAI.org, New York Radio, author, Manufacturing Hate, on which this program itself is built. He is none other than the good comrade Milton Allimadi.
Expert chef. He's been regaling us with pictures of sumptuous meals, very delicious looking, healthy meal option.
Omelette with egg white. That's the max.
No, you had another one, and then you your plating skills. He has like a little oil thing and stuff. It's very, very, very wonderfully done.
Thank you, Comrade.
Okay, after whetting the appetite, here's where you at, please.
We'll start with Comrade because I know he's got a doozy for us.
Yeah, well, obviously, the Correspondence thing, dinner last night, right? I'm sure anyone interested in news that follow news is aware of what happened last night when a gunman was interdicted, I guess at the security perimeter. Didn't really get into the ballroom itself. So at this point, we don't know his true intentions yet. But nonetheless, he was armed and apparently shot a Secret Service agent. He was a guest and registered guest at that hotel where the Correspondence dinner, which is an annual event with the president. And I guess this is the first time Trump was attending. So, in the circumstances like this, one of the first thoughts that you always think, let it not be a brother. Let it not be a brother. But in this case, apparently, it was a brother. Apparently, a brilliant one at that. He's a graduate of engineering from Caltech. Caltech is among the 10 top universities in the United States. It's referred to as the MIT of the West Coast, you see. He has an undergrad in engineering, and he has a master's degree. So I'm still trying to fathom, the circumstances. And I guess at some point, we will get more information. And then, of course, the president, after the incident, insisted on meeting with journalists. And I found one of the things he said that, to me, at least, is most remarkable, is that the event itself and the incident showed how united Republicans, Democrats, and independents were in terms of how they reacted to it, right, within the ballroom. And that he said we should resolve our differences peacefully. This is the same guy who was lured into Netanyahu's war against Iran, that bloody, destructive conflict. This is the same guy who called off his emissaries who were supposed to head to negotiate to resolve this conflict with Iran. So what else is new, right? So those are my comments on this incident. Over to you, sister.
If I may piggyback on that, this is the same guy who has weaponized ICE against people within his own borders. This is the same guy who, in the most recent budget that they are submitting, is requesting cuts to almost every social program so that they can fund more war. This is the guy who gives tax cuts to the ultra wealthy and cuts food benefits to the poor, the needy, to the elderly, who cuts off people's healthcare access.
Exactly.
We can go on, but let's, since we're on this topic, let's talk about some other things. First and foremost, in what United States of America does a Black man breach a security perimeter, shoot a Secret Service officer, and live? Like, can we just start there? Like, when have you guys seen someone wrestle to the ground and then by the time they show pictures, he has a towel around him? Like, where did they strip him naked before they now put the towel around him to now show the picture of him prostrate on the ground in a white towel? Because I was like, wait a second, he came to attack them naked? Oh, no, they took his clothes off. What is going on here? Not a mark on him. His head wasn't blown off. We get killed for a broken tailpipe. And you want to tell me that this dude came in with all the weapons they said he had, shot an officer at close range, and lived to tell the tale? Listen, he is the second coming of Christ. If this story is true, that's who you guys need to make a meme of and worship. In the United States of America? Yeah. Okay. Wait a second. Where have we seen this before? The polls. I'm losing an election. Wow. Ketchup on my ear. A whole bullet supposedly went through my ear or grazed my ear and nothing is hanging down. I had a big old bandage that I taped on there for 2.5 seconds and the whole world started to tape.
For 2 weeks.
Well, okay, 2 weeks. And now the ear is perfect. Is this Hollywood? What is this? Okay. And Carolyn Levitt had just before that told us shots will be fired. Wait a second. And then the shots are fired. They pulled J.D. Vance first. J.D. Vance was evacuated before Trump.
Yep.
And they're trying to get Trump. He's stumbling and falling. Somebody enlarged that video. And they leave Melania Trump crawling under the table. He's not even asking for his woman. Let me tell you, cannot wait to see the Iran Lego videos on this one. I cannot wait to see it. But yes, so now it's an assassination attempt. You just supposedly got your life threatened again, and you're talking about a ballroom. And within minutes, all of your MAGA influencers are talking about the need for a ballroom. Yep. That is wait a second. But then during this whole thing, there's a gentleman right there. He's just recording with his phone. There's another one just eating his salad. They were so scared. He's just eating his salad. You all, okay, whatever.
No. The eating the salary part, that one I can understand. With the price of groceries the way it is, I would finish my salad too.
Like, hey, I'm in here, I'm getting my food. Okay, whatever, y'all. Whatever. This is while you know your polls are tanking, nobody likes you, you're losing the war in Iran, you have no off-ramp, you keep telling lies, Iran is not even negotiating with you anymore. You need a diversion. How many times has this president pulled this off? And you all keep falling for it.
Yeah, the only part that doesn't add.
I don't know if they paid you. I don't know what happened. I don't know if you are I don't know what the situation is. It will unfold. But then right after that, for him to hold a press conference, I tuned out after 20 minutes. I'm like, seriously? You're crazy.
That was consistent with him. He used that to plug the need for the ballroom. For me, what doesn't add up is if it's true that this guy is a Caltech graduate, that's going to be very difficult to fit him.
And he donated $25 to Kamala Harris. They had that information in 30 seconds. Of course.
That one they would have to give out. You know that. Mm-hmm. But the graduate from Caltech and then a master's as well. But there are elements, you're right, that are going to be manipulated. Right? The appearance after the incident, the weaponry he had, exchanging fire with agents. We need to see, the place has cameras all over the place. I haven't seen the exchange.
How did he not get killed?
I haven't seen the exchange of fire yet.
Please.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Yeah. So the exchange of fire, that would have been produced by us. So there are a lot of things, more questions than answers. Let's put it on.
People, go and vote this horrible, I'm still going to call him a human being, but go get this man and all his supporters out. Do not be distracted. Do not be distracted.
Okay, so while the drama is going on in the United States, the UK is onto much more serious matters. The Prime Minister's right-hand man who okayed the appointment of Peter Mandusi as the U.S. ambassador in light of his links to Jeffrey Epstein is going to sit before the parliamentary hearing next week. But at the moment, there are calls for the Prime Minister to resign because apparently he let the ball fall on his watch. So, yeah, the grown-ups are still in the room, but obviously not in that side of the world. So.
Epstein Queen. Have you seen that Lego video?
Yes. Yeah, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Europe is much more, I think they understand the gravity of the situation. So they're not going to let it slide. And what happened in the United States yesterday just compounded everything. I mean, we had no words for it. It's like, listen, the
we
US
are wild over here.
That's the word, wild. Yes. And so with that said, let's go
By the way, I wasn't there for a reason. A couple of months ago, the White House, they always want to have non-quote-unquote traditional media there, right?
Yeah.
You were going to be there?
Well, they sent me an email to apply for credentials, right?
Okay.
And then I applied.
Listen,
and then
remember we told you this man is a legend. Okay, let's hear this.
And then they went, and I think they saw the editorial we write about Trump.
No, this is not how independent.
We never got the credentials, which is fine.
But would you have stayed to eat your lettuce?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Are you kidding me? I might have taken it with me under the table.
Okay, that said, let's go to Kenya for the first news story. And this has become some sort of a pet project for me. And you would see why. And so it goes to this issue of British soldiers siring kids in Africa. And so the headline reads, "They told me he was dead. Children born near army base learned the truth about UK soldiers dead." And so there's this part now. It says, Edward, a 9-year-old Kenyan boy, has always been aware his father worked for the British military. The boy's skin color lighter than his peers had provoked years of bullying. His father disappeared before Edward was born, not his real name, was born, leaving his mom living in extreme poverty, ostracized by some of her family. Now, this man who worked as a contractor at a business at a British army base in Kenya and 19 others who served as soldiers there have been identified through a groundbreaking DNA and legal process as fathers of children born near the base. A paternity has now been legally confirmed in 12 of the cases by the UK highest family court judge, a BBC World Service investigation can reveal. So, we've done a series of stories like this. There was one in Congo with regards to the Belgians, about 50,000 kids. There is one that is still making the rounds, but that has largely been hush-hush, and that's the role of the Japanese in the Congo as well. Now we're looking at the British officers in Kenya. What do we do?
Okay, so what I like about this is that since you started highlighting and focusing this in our conversations several months ago, we've now seen a transition in terms of the substance of the issue. when we started the regular conversation over this topic, there was like, who are they? I didn't have any kids in Africa. That was the attitude and that was the substance of the media coverage as well. And then we transitioned from there to accountability. We discussed that case in Belgium, where in the lower courts, the children who were fathered by these absentee European fathers had lost, but then the appellate court overturned it and awarded them. So they won. So we've seen qualitatively the difference in terms of what is now being written about. And in this particular article, we are now talking accountability, including financial accountability. So I like that this is a story that you picked and you've been consistently following, and our listeners have been able and viewers have been able to see the transition in terms of the substance of the issue. They've now introduced people who are able to do DNA ancestry connection and definitively identify these absentee fathers. They're saying as many as 100 may be involved, much more. They're saying at least 12 of them are now in the stage where they're being held to show up and be financially accountable. They did not discuss whether it's going to be retroactive. It has to be retroactive. You can't start child support now. You have to start child support retroactively since the child was born. So that's the part that, is missing in the story. I hope that is the case. In fact, what I don't like, one or two things. There's a part where I forget his name, I think it's Korea, the Kenyan lawyer, when he was asked, should this type of relations be just banned by the British military? Because they say what, as many as 5,000 British soldiers are in and out of that program within every year. So they're sending troops to train in Kenya with Kenyans. And then they end up having these relations with Kenyan women, they have kids, and they disappear. So the lawyer was asked, should it be banned? And he said, no, it would be racist to ban this just because these are European soldiers, blah, blah. That's nonsense. It should be banned. He says, because they could be consensual relations. First of all, the power dynamics alone, they cannot be consensual relations. So it should be banned. If you're going to come back as a tourist, that's your business between the two of you and the parties involved. But so long as you're there on a training mission under the auspices of the Ministry of Defense, not only the soldier, but the British Ministry of Defense should be automatically liable. So it should be banned. So that's what I wanted to add to this conversation.
Sister.
So I want to put a very human face to this issue because, again, sometimes we read these things and they're just words on a story, on a page. In my own family, I have cousins who have lived this. So I have a cousin who is now in her 70s. And when my aunt, who's deceased now, was a fairly young woman in her teens, a French contractor had sexual relations with her and she got pregnant. He went on his merry way and she had that baby. And my aunt, my cousin who is still living, has told me how difficult life initially was for her, being as fair-skinned as she was and the different hair and all of that, and not having a father. And basically my grandfather, her grandfather as well, sitting down and telling her, you're mine, and I'm going to protect you from the naysayers and all of these other people and all of that. But till today, I suppose maybe now with Ancestry, if she wanted to, she could go and try to do a trace. Like I said, she's in her 70s at this time. But till today, she does not know who her father is. And when we had this conversation and her telling me about this childhood trauma, she was already in her 60s, but she could recall the pain of what she experienced as a child and how much my grandfather's protection meant to her at that time. Fast forward later, there was another Dutch man who was working in Nigeria, and he had a whole family in the Netherlands, but he took off, and you would say the consensual relationship with a cousin of mine, and has a whole family. I have cousins from him. I'm talking, well, by the time I left Nigeria, 3 kids. I don't know if they had any more after that. And the wife in the Netherlands was not aware of
The wife
a
and
whole family that he had home and this and representing my cousin as his wife in Nigeria. Don't know what happens, for instance, when he passes away, who inherits what, so on and so forth. So these things are not just stories on a paper. They are actually people's lived experiences. I know that because I know people who've lived it, and just the trauma that it creates. And yes, African countries, African governments have an obligation. Yeah, we can call light skin, fair skin. Of course, all of these words have loaded because we know the English language has been weaponized against us. Different colored skin, different hue. But our countries have an obligation to protect our people. And if folk are going to come in to quote unquote train or extract resources or whatever else, they should have to abide by the laws of the land. And what are our laws? We need to figure those out and we need to tell them they have to abide by them. But understand that there is, again, historical precedence here where Europeans feel like they can come and impose their laws on you, but when they're on your land, you don't get to impose your laws on them. So when we go to the Western countries, we are immigrants. When Westerners, when Europeans come to African nations, they are expats. Very different set of rules. And so you can come to what is now called the United States of America and never have to respect the laws of the indigenous people, but then create your own laws and then find them guilty of not obeying your own laws. And so even going back to pre-colonial and colonial times, these Europeans always felt like they were above our own laws, but they could impose their own laws on us. So even as you look at what's happening with this story with these children in Kenya, we're still dependent on Britain
to help right the
and
wrong.
their laws to hold these soldiers accountable, to identify them. Should they say, hey, we're not doing anything, like we don't have any recourse? So our government should absolutely, in any of these memoranda of understanding that they're signing, this should be implicitly stated and maybe a fund set aside already. If you guys do any of this, this is where we're going to be pulling resources out of because it's far too prevalent.
Yeah. I just want to add one more item here. And obviously, we know the story of Andre Bluen, this great revolutionary who is also, of course, featured
whose mother was raped at 13, even though they would say it was consensual.
Right. A soundtrack from the coup d'etat is the documentary film that people, if you haven't seen it, see that. And of course, he is it autobiography or biography? Autobiography, I think.
Autobiography.
Right, that she wrote, and how her own mother was raped as a child by a French so-called businessman and ended up abandoning both her and the child. And she grew up in an orphanage in the Congo, where at the orphanage, the mixed race children were kept segregated from the other African children. A very abusive orphanage. It's just it's how she turned out the way she turned out.
Yeah.
As one of the greatest Pan-Africans who loved the African continent and saw Africa as one. But that is probably the rare situation. Normally, based on those type of circumstances, they have lifelong trauma and are not productive members of society.
Yeah. Well, okay. We'll continue to monitor the situation.
But in our countries, too, we need to stop ostracizing women. We need to stop ostracizing women and vilifying them and their offspring. It is not helpful.
As Sankara said, remember that scene from Thomas Sankara, The Upright Man?
Yes.
When he was in the school with the young boys and girls, and he says, I can never understand. Why is it that when the young girl student gets pregnant, she's expelled from the school? As if you boys had nothing to do with her pregnancy. And you could tell that that's the first time anybody had probably laid it out that way to them, just by their reaction. the boys, you know?
Okay, yeah. From the African child, let's go to Pope Leo. So Pope Leo was recently in Africa. He has since gone back home now. But there's something interesting about this story. So this story comes from Al Jazeera, and it's titled Pope Leo says not seeking new debate with Trump on trip to Angola. Leo is the third pontiff to visit the fossil fuel-rich country, referring to Angola after Pope John Paul in 1992 and Benedict in 2009. Okay, so Pope Leo has downplayed his recent back and forth with United States President Donald J. Trump over the Middle East as he travels to Angola on the third leg. Now, the key thing that stood out to me in this story was, which is the reason why I highlighted it in this color as opposed to yellow, is the fact that if you count that color, it is essentially about Trump. It's not about Angola, nor is it about Africa. In fact, if anything, Africa was just an afterthought in there. And the only part that stood out to me was, where was it? It was a part where, So on Sunday, he will celebrate an open mass in Kilamba outside Luanda before traveling by helicopter to Muxima. And for those who are well versed in African history, Muxima was the base of Queen Nzinga. And in fact, it's where her son, Alfonso I, wrote to the Portuguese church, seeking clarity on the issue of the transatlantic slave trade. So, that said, Comrade, what do you say?
Very good. You make a very good observation. And I don't know, was this the only article they've written about that trip? Have they written another version that refers to what you're actually talking about, Angola-centric, you know? But this is typically what they do. This is a typical type New York Times style story where regardless of what and where the person is, they go to what has been the lead. What was the lead months ago involving the Pope and a major figure? And that lead was Trump. So they find any situation where they can connect and go back to that lead because they know in a major story search, that is going to generate probably more traffic and more readership, unfortunately. If you're focusing on Afrocentric, it's not going to get the type of readership that you want. And that's, journalistically speaking, why they do that type of stuff. Because people may not understand why they do it. They may think, wait a minute, how could trained journalists, presumably educated, follow a pope, visiting an African country, and the story is not centered in that African country and the pope and his engagement with that African country? So I just gave the explanation of how the Euro-lead-centric that they're always searching for. So that explains the essence of what the story should have been. But there are other elements that also I would have liked to have seen. And perhaps the Pope actually spoke about these other elements, but we're not seeing it covered by the Al Jazeera's and other media outlets. Because based on his comments about Trump, for example, saying, the world would be pillaged by tyrants, of course he was referring to Trump as well. And I like what he said, that, this speech was written a while ago before that interaction with Trump. So a while ago, you already knew that Trump was a tyrant. And it did specifically say this had nothing to do with Trump, you see?
Yes.
So, of course, it had everything to do with Trump. So I like that particular part. But there's another major story that I would like our viewers and listeners to get to know if they're not aware. Many know about Queen Nzinga, of course, and her legendary resistance to European enslavers, particularly Portuguese enslavers, and her many victories against them until, of course, she was compromised by other African leaders in the surrounding kingdoms and forced to find an accommodation with them as a state. But there's also the story of Kimpavita, who was in the following century, because Queen Nzinga was 17, but in the 18th century, Kimpavita, and I love her. This is a woman who was burned at the stake I did my Kickstarter book on Adwa, and I highlighted Empress Taitu. And my next project may be actually Kipavita. This is a sister who said, condemn the Catholic Church and the Catholic priest and the Vatican because they are not teaching Catholicism the correct way. She said Jesus and all the disciples were Black Africans who were born in the kingdom of the Congo. You got to love that. And for that, she was burned on the stake in 1706. I hope the Pope mentioned that. I wouldn't be surprised if he did not, because that was one of the original African revolutionaries. Over to you, sister.
So for those of you who want to get more information on Queen Taitu, you should go to Women in Resistance, because we actually covered her. And interesting that, but not surprising that so few have heard of her name or know just her influence, what she was able to accomplish even back in her time. So thank you for raising the names of these incredibly powerful women. Talking about, let me address this two ways. First of all, the centering Trump. I just want to say, in terms of the media, I understand you guys have to do clickbait and all of that, but I also want them to understand their complicity. The media created Trump. They created this monster, and they keep feeding the monster. So even though, yes, it's going to get more eyeballs, all of that, listen, what do they say in show business? All publicity is good publicity. You just want to keep your name out there. And so the fact that everything you want to tie it back to him, let this man fade into irrelevancy, and he will truly lose his mind. But the fact that you just keep centering that's how you got him elected in the first place. He didn't even have to campaign and spend any money the first time around because he got so much free publicity, even though there was someone actually in the White House working. That aside, let's talk about Pope Leo and this trip to Africa. Why are all these popes now finding their way to Africa in the way that they are? Because, as Desmond Tutu told us, they came with the Bible. Although, if you know our history, you know that the Bible, the original Bible, you can go back to Ethiopia, but okay, they came with their version of the Bible, told us, close your eyes, let us pray. We closed our eyes to pray. When we opened our eyes, we had the Bible, they had the land.
Yep.
We're not talking about any responsibility that the Catholic Church has for sanctioning and blessing the dehumanization of African people and the slave trade. We're not speaking about the fact that they owned slaves, they ran plantations, the Jesuits in particular, that they collected tithes and offerings and got land grants through all of these colonial land grabs and so on and so forth, that continue to power the Vatican today. But the reason that they're still there and going back to Africa is because while Europeans are largely, one, dying off, but two, also not even embracing any form of faith, the areas where Catholicism are growing are Latin America, amongst people of Hispanic heritage, if you will, and Africa. And actually, the largest growth is happening in Africa.
Yep.
Where right now about 20% of all Catholics around the world are from Africa. But in terms of growth, that is where you see the largest amount of growth taking place. So Africa, again, is a continent that is going to have to be reckoned with, regardless of what institution you're talking about. Our sheer numbers and our birth rates are such that you are not going to be able to just disregard us. But then what are Africans doing with this power? What is the Catholic Church doing in Africa? Speaking from personal experience again, I went to a boarding school, and I know the personal stories that friends told me about what some of these Catholic priests are doing in terms of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
With no guardrails, and unlike in Western worlds where they are having to, in some cases, pay some form of restitution, there is no restitution in Africa. As a matter of fact, when these Catholic priests are removed from their positions
They're
in
repositioned.
the US and Europe, they are put in Asia and Latin America and Africa, because in these places, no one holds them accountable. So, Pope Leo, thank you for speaking up to the extent that you have spoken up. Maybe it is those Creole roots from your maternal side that are rising up and bring up your sense of injustice. But, sir, can you please let it grow and blossom even more and hold the entire Catholic Church, before they kill you too, accountable for what you all are still doing to the dispossessed across the continent of Africa? We would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, and to add to that, what you just said, the last two popes, including this particular pope, there's no reason why they should not have elected an African to be the pope.
There is reason.
There's no acceptable to us reason.
Yes.
So let me amend it.
No, okay. You don't want to make the church in the image of, it's going to be scary to the natives. Yes.
No, actually, it's interesting you say that. So let me make just one other quick comment also. Obviously, of course, I love Kimpa Vita. I love Kimbangu.
What's the name?
Kimpa Vita. Kimpa Vita. Vita. I encourage our viewers and listeners to read up on her. And then in Congo,
he's going to add her to the list for women and resistance. I already know.
Excellent. No, could you spell that? Could you spell that again? It's Kiv.
K-I.
Okay.
And then the last name is Vita. Vita.
Okay. Kim Vita.
And then in Congo, we had Kimbangu. Kimbangu. And he also Africanized the Catholic Church and built up a movement that was rivaling the European Catholic Church in Congo. So I like these Afrocentric versions. But then, of course, I remember I told this story about in Uganda, this older man who also was a Catholic and used to go to the church every Sunday. And the prayer was in Latin. So they're now Africanizing. And they adopted the local Luo language for the sermons, for the Bible. And one day, the first day he heard that, he quit. He was asked why he quit. He said it can't be the true teaching because this was, the way it was being taught was so common and he could understand it. And he thinks in order to really understand God, there has to be something that's inaccessible. This one was just too accessible for him. So he found it unacceptable. So, of course, that goes through the neo-colonial conditioning as well. That a God cannot be that relatable and so African to be true.
Okay. So from talking about Trump to actually what Trump did, we go to New York Times, and it's that Mr. Trump is said to be in talks to send Afghans who aided U.S. forces to Congo. A U.S. aid worker said the Afghans who were evacuated to Qatar would face a choice between moving to the Democratic Republic of Congo and living under the Taliban. There is just this part here. Sean Van Diva, the president of the aid group Afghan EVAC, said he had been briefed on the Congo plan by State Department officials. He said that the Afghans will be given a choice between returning to live under the Taliban or being sent to Congo, which is suffering one of the worst humanitarian crises. More than 600,000 refugees, mostly from Central African Republic and Rwanda, are currently in Congo, according to the United Nations. Human rights activists say the country is not equipped to take in more in the midst of fighting with neighboring Rwanda that has displaced more people because of attacks on refugee camps. We think this is just wanting them to send these people back to Afghanistan, where they know they will face certain death, said Mr. Van Diver. They know that the Afghans are not going to accept the DRC. Why would you want to go to the world's number one refugee crisis from the world's number one refugee crisis to the world's number two refugee crisis? With that said, let me just add on top of that. Why is it that all of a sudden the United States feels the people he finds reprehensible or extra to its needs, he has to dump on everybody else. And in particular, we're talking about Eswatini, Gabon, Sudan, South Sudan, and now Congo, and also Ghana. Comrade.
All right. So obviously it says how they regard those people, first of all, right?
Yeah.
Basically as garbage. But there's nothing surprising that they're doing something like that. In the 1990s, I remember the U.S. Was shopping African countries and to see which one would take toxic waste, nuclear toxic waste, right?
Mm.
And a number of African countries were considering it. I think it was Egypt, I think it was Somalia, and that's the Bahrain. They were considering it. So there's nothing difference between what they're doing now and what they were doing in the 90s with nuclear toxic waste, because that's how they see these Afghans. Imagine, these are people who actually, when the U.S. had occupied Afghanistan, was fighting on behalf
of the U.S.
of the United States. But this is new. Remember that happened in the 1960s with Vietnamese. Not all of the Vietnamese were evacuated. The ones who had collaborated with the U.S. during its war on and occupation of Vietnam. So there's nothing new about this. You know, if you connect the history, you'll see why it's happening. And then
they did the same thing in Iraq as well.
And then to me, I think there's a couple of challenges. So the New York Times reporters are speaking on behalf of these 1,000 people because they're saying, by saying it that way, they're saying, if I were in their shoes, there's no way am I going to Africa. But we don't know that, right?
Yeah.
That goes to the Eurocentric entitlement that you're able to speak on behalf of everybody else. We don't know. If you're faced with the certainty of death, if I'm in their shoes, I would say, okay, let me see what Congo has. You know, it's not certainty of death. And then the reference to one of the world's worst humanitarian crises that is bad, but it's not true. One of the worst is, in fact, in Sudan that we discuss on an almost a weekly basis. So those are the elements really about this story that I wanted to touch on. And then finally, of course, and we've spoken about this many times, practically every week, the weakness of these fictitious African states, that they're in a position where they can't even say, no, this is an offer that they can't refuse because these are neo-colonial leaders whose existence and hold to power is directly dependent on and connected to the people that are asking them to take these refugees.
Sister, Trump.
So, to the point that Comrade just made, when he says we're in talks with, is it, you know, it's like if I have my 5-year-old niece and I'm twisting her arm and I have complete control through whatever means, financial, otherwise, are we having talks? She has to do what I say. Listen, when they come to my house, they have to do what I say. It's just, what is she going to do? Is she going to fight me? But then again, that's what happens when we're disunified. If we had a unified African continent, then it's not these individual countries trying to stand up to a bully. It's a unified force standing up to a bully. And we know Trump is a bully of the worst kind. But it's also how Africa is viewed, that yes, we are a dumping ground for any issues that the West does not want to deal with, including Israel. We covered it on this show. Israel signing some agreement with Somaliland. Hey, we're going to provide some security assistance to you. And in return, you're going to take in the Palestinians, sorry. And yet, if we look historically, what happens when you just have some people dumped on you? What happens when the Dutch showed up, or when the British showed up, or when the Lebanese showed up, or when the Indians showed up? And how does that impact the environment and the social structure? And then what happens later on with the tensions that we continue to see play out, because there is a social hierarchy that is created to the detriment most of the time of the people who originally lived there. But then the other thing is, the DRC with what they are already dealing with? 600,000 refugees already that they're trying to contend with? Like, make it make sense on any level. But it's really, this is not our problem. We're going to just dump you there. So for all the rest of you who are thinking, and this is not just on a geopolitical level, this is on interpersonal levels. I'm going to become an ally with X, Y, and Z because they've made promises of so-and-so. Go and study the history of that entity, of that person, of that organization, because if they've done it before, they're most likely going to do it again to you. And too many of us are aligning ourselves. Now, you can say in the case of the Afghans, what could they have done? With what was going on with the Taliban, they had to align themselves and they just hoped and prayed. But then this is also, voting has consequences. All of you who said the two parties are the same, including some members of those groups.
Yeah.
And you were singing the praises of this
tyrant in chief.
Felon in chief. Let me just leave it at that. Now you see what happens when you lay down with dogs.
So now, let me also add one comment. Africans also, these misrulers also have, a limit. And that's why there's really no excuse. They know exactly what they're doing, right? So Somaliland signed that, so Israel recognized it. But then when it came to the issue of accepting deported Palestinians, they're debating that. They were told in no uncertain terms by other African misrulers that no, that won't happen. This is comparable to when Liberia was trying to accept AfriForum headquarters in Liberia. And Nigeria said, no, there might be military consequences. In other words, Nigeria would have been willing to invade Liberia. They have a limit. They accept so much garbage, but there's a limit. No African country to date has accepted that AfriForum should be headquartered on African soil. That's why their headquarters is in Germany. In Germany. Of course, you have all the bases, and these neo-colonial, countries are accepting bases, but not headquarters of Africa. It's comparable to accepting the Palestinian. Does that give us hope? There's hope, but not under these neo-colonial leadership, under the youth that should take power in Africa.
Okay.
I think it's important to note just the consistency. So when they wanted to populate this lands now known as the United States of America, did they not empty out some of their prisons?
Yes.
Many of the colonial officers were people who had already gotten into trouble, or men who could not make it in their own countries, and then they would ship them off to Latin America, to Africa, to Asia,
Australia.
Yes. So the patterns are, you can't make it where you are, or you are a degenerate where you are, so we're going to dump you somewhere else.
Useful.
Force you on other people.
Yeah, and be a useful tool to empire. Yes. So if people are finding value with what we do here, do like, share, subscribe, do all the good things. Hype. Apparently that's the new stuff now. So for our final story, we go to Radio France International, and it's from South Africa. It is that South Africa's EFF leader, the Economic Freedom Fighters, leader Julius Malema is jailed for 5 years on gun charges. A South African court has sentenced radical left-wing opposition leader Julius Malema to 5 years in jail for firing a rifle into the air at a rally 8 years ago. Now, for me, this is the key part. Where is it? The case against the EFF was brought by a small conservative group called AfriForum. Malema had long been accused by AfriForum, notably for his use at the rallies of an anti-apartheid chant, Kill the Boer, a word that often refers to the country's minority white Afrikaner population. And some would argue that, yes, but the fact that the charge itself happened in 2018 and that Trump, the Afrikaner lobby group had brought these long-standing complaints against Malema to the attention of, guess who? U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump showed clips of Malema chanting the slogan at talks at the White House with Ramaphosa in May last year, in quote, "But why won't you arrest that man?" Trump asked Ramaphosa, referring to Malema. So, and you know where this is going. So, are we seeing recompense being paid for his stance on with regards to true liberation of South Africa? And we can see elements of that in the Dudula, Operation Dudula, which is the violence against Africans in South Africa. And dare I say it, I mean, it's sickening to say the least. But let me gather your thoughts. Comrade.
All right. So, I mean, if he broke the law and he fired a gun that you're not supposed to do, there has to be consequences.
Yeah.
I think obviously the sentencing is, sounds pretty absurd to me. 5 years for firing in the air. Obviously, he was with comrades at that event. He did not mean to harm any of them. There was no ill intent, and ultimately there was no injured party. But if it's a violation, I imagine there are some consequences. But 5 years sounds obviously very excessive. The timing, the politics, and all that also, of course, bears on the U.S. attitude right now toward South Africa. And that might have accounted for the length of sentencing of 5 years. Minus the U.S. conduct towards South Africa, I don't believe he would have heard a 5-year sentence or something like that. I think the sentence on appeal probably will be reduced to much less time, if not even suspended a sentence. But the rest of the article reveals the true reason for interest in this story. They're putting the leadership of the Democratic Alliance, which of course is the European Party that is now in government with the ANC. And they made sure to mention that it is larger than Malema's party. And they made sure in the article to mention that Malema's party is not a part of
the coalition
government. And they made sure to mention that Malema's party is Marxist-inspired, which is completely false, of course. It's socialist-inspired. And there's a vast and significant difference between that. But by mentioning the M word of Marxism, they know exactly what they are trying to accomplish. AfriForum has nothing to do with Africa. The Afri part is not really African at all. This is a party that is an organization that is financed by Europeans. They want to undo apartheid in South Africa. These are the folks who are talking about building a wall in South Africa to prevent foreigners, referring to other Africans, from coming to South Africa. And it was very effective. It fueled anti-Africanism by Africans in South Africa toward other Africans, whose countries, by the way, was the main reason why apartheid was defeated, because their taxpayer money or their parents' taxpayer money contributed to the money that African countries, they're messed up on many issues, but when it came to fighting apartheid, they were not messed up. All of them contributed. The money was sent to Tanzania and the other frontline countries to train the guerrillas who are fighting, to close them, to buy weapons for them, right? So they contributed to your liberation. And yet I understand why you're treating them this way, because your minds are still colonized. They're not taking your jobs. Your jobs are not being created because 8% of Europeans control 90% of the economy and 70% of the land. Think about it. 34 years after apartheid supposedly ended, 8% control 72%. You're thinking, okay, it's very bad, but at least they still control the 28%. No. Africans control 4% because the other difference is controlled by of Indian ancestry and of so-called mixed race ancestry. 80% of the population control 4% of the land. You see, that's the narrative that you're not being taught, and that is what could inspire you to go out to actually physically attack and even kill other Africans who contributed to your liberation and now are trying to earn a living in South Africa as well.
Sister, take us home.
And no, let me add this though. The irony is that if he gets 5 years, compare that with the killers of Steve Biko and all the liberation fighters in South Africa who got 0 time under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Think about that irony.
So this is Comrade reading my mind, because that was the point I was going to make. Like, wait a second. He fired a gun into the air, celebratory, not attacking anybody. And for all those children who were killed in the Soweto massacre, all of that, like, who's in jail for how many years? Please, can someone explain to me? What are we talking about here when we're talking about justice? Yes, should laws be abided by, so on and so forth? Yes, but it's how laws are applied, because how else is this 34-time convicted felon, adjudicated sexual abuser, the president of the United States of America, and then somebody else sold a $50 bag of weed and they're in jail and have lost their job and their children are now in foster care and so on and so forth? So, but here's the bigger issue for me, and you were speaking to this. What happened, and this is an issue with many of our organizations, Malema is the face of EFF. What happens if Malema is sidelined for 5 years?
Yeah.
What happens to EFF? Already we saw how they were attacked and marginalized in the last election cycle, which then allowed compromised elitist Africans to form a coalition with their very own oppressors. So what happens if he's marginalized? And that is one of the loudest voices asking for land to be returned to Africans, asking for not just political power, but economic power. So you silence him like you silenced all the other great South African leaders, and you basically attempt to kill that movement, or at least water it down to truth and reconciliation. And then 100 years from now, our children's children are having this conversation about how Africa is still not free and Black South Africans still have nothing to show for their so-called independence.
Yeah.
So I've not studied their judicial system, how their appeals process goes. Certainly, when I look at some of these moves that are being made that we covered with Ramaphosa and who he's just appointed as ambassador to the U.S., and some of the conciliatory things that seem to be being done to make nice with the United States of America, I don't know if he's going to be scapegoated, but it is to the detriment.
He definitely will. He definitely will. Maybe not 5 years, but then maybe again 5 years. But what you're saying is correct. They're preparing for the next election. By the next election, as I said a couple of weeks ago, the ANC will be the minority partner.
Wow.
Because by crushing the EFF, you're going to build the capacity of the quote-unquote Democratic Alliance, whatever that is. And you notice they never mention in the article that is a white-led party.
No, you can't do that. You can't.
I think we should not also overlook that Afrikaner that they mentioned, because they've come up in a different story that we covered. These lobbyists, same thing that they're doing in the same way APAC is controlling so much of American politics. What they're doing is throwing a lot of money in. You find these former ambassadors and, U.S. officials and all of that, and other European officials, and they now work as lobbyists for this organization, pressuring African nations to do what it is that they want them to do, and then, throwing their money around. That's how come, what's your prime minister's name who ended up having a cushy job with...
Tony Blair.
Yeah, Tony Blair. And they gave him an office like right next to the president's office, so that they don't even have to work hard at spying at the country and knowing every single move that the country's making. I mean, where is the common sense, people? Where?
No, they're doing it the quote-unquote smart way now. They don't need Soweto massacre. They don't need Sharpeville anymore. Now, well-compensated, melanated people are the top spokespersons now,
in sharp suits as well. Yes, so with that said, we've come to the end of this week's episode of African News Review. Let me get my final thoughts. Comrade?
Well, I hope comrades see value in our conversations and that they support this platform. There are many challenges, and obviously we only have an opportunity to touch a little slice of it. But the more we are able to expand this platform, the more people we can get to join this conversation. We have to resist. We have no choice when we see what's going on around the world.
Sister?
Please go out and vote. There are elections in my community right now. There are elections happening all over the country. Support candidates. They need people to donate. They need block walkers. They need people to make calls, and they need people to go out to the polls. Don't just complain about something. Be about something.
Yes, and with that said, see you all next week. Thank you all for coming through. And until next week, it's good night and God bless.
Luta continua.
That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.